for Trump Republicans to help him win this race, or that's what many are saying anyway.
All right, joining us now to talk about that and much more new polling, Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins and Director of Media at the Lincoln Network, Marshall Kosloff, two great friends of the show. Good to see you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start off with these head-to-head pollings. Now that Bernie has basically moved up into the front-runner status, I think we want to start taking a look at more, and we've done this with the two of you, as the Trump and a Sanders matchup. Let's pull up the head-to-head polling of each of the Democratic candidates. This comes from CBS YouGov poll. It's a 1.2% margin of error, so it's actually pretty good. It basically shows Sanders is in the best position of 47-44 Trump in the terms of the popular vote than any of these other candidates. Michael, what did you make of that particular? Also, I'm laughing because Bloomberg, I think, was it Bloomberg and Amy Klobuchar are the only ones that perform the worst?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a race if Sanders is the nominee of a populist against a faux populist. Mm-hmm. I think the big problem is going to be you're going to end up having Republican/conservative media absolutely decimate him when it comes to the framing of the race. I mean, I think comparing Venezuela and things that aren't realistic, but, you know, that's how it works, comparing Sanders to those situations, I think are going to have a real devastating effect on his ability.
So you think it's going to be devastating. Marshall, what do you think? Because I mean, part of my whole ethos is that I disagree. I don't think it's going to be devastating. I mean, I saw the freak out over the Fidel Castro thing. I don't think people care what somebody said about Fidel Castro. Sure, but I think Florida's gone. This is what we talked about already with Chuck Rocha. It's like, look, 80-year-old Cuban who votes on Castro is not going to vote for Sanders anyway, right?
Yeah, so I think Bernie's case is about driving turnout. Bernie's not coming here trying to, Bernie's not going to forget to go to Wisconsin. Like, that's the key difference between 2016 and 2020. Like, he's not running his candidacy on the idea he's going to win in Miami. His candidacy is about the fact that in 2016 you had low turnout. In 2018 you had high turnout. We need to have a candidate who continue to bring those people out there. So that's the key difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at the Nevada results, you start to see validation of the Sanders theory of the case. And look, I think this is going to be a very tough election, right? I think President Trump comes into this with a lot of strength. Of course, the conservative media is going to savage whoever the Democratic nominee is, certainly Sanders to be included. But you did see in Nevada, first of all, disproportionate strength with Latinos. This is a key voting bloc, especially if you're looking at Sunbelt states as a path towards that 270 electoral votes. You saw new people being brought into the process, new young people being brought into the process. And you also see in polls, you know, regularly across the country that Bernie performs disproportionately well with the white working class type of voters that Trump went over. I mean, in addition to these national head-to-heads, polls out of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin also showed Bernie outperforming the rest of the Democratic field against Donald Trump. So it seems to me like he has the best theory of the case going in, that he can not only expand the base, but also win back some of those people that were lost last time.
Well, I do think it's a map game, and I think that Sanders' candidacy is going to make it really hard actually in some of those Sunbelt states because of his desire.
So what would he lose that Hillary won? What do you think?
I think he would probably lose North Carolina. I think he may be able to pull off Michigan. The problem with his strategy is going to be he has to basically win Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, states that he's already behind. And
he's not behind.
No, he's not behind. It's
in Wisconsin, Democrats are down by 8.
The most recent poll that just came out, YouGov, had Bernie winning Wisconsin by 7 points.
Okay, the one I saw the other day had him down by 8.
You're right. There was also Wisconsin.
It may have been I think I might be thinking about Michigan, but he was ahead in Wisconsin. It was 2 or 3 points.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be a tougher sell for him because older people are going to be a lot more reticent to have, you know, kind of the revolutionary change that he's going to have. And we have to trust that young people are going to come out and overperform like you were talking about. And that's been something that's been, for Democrats, a losing argument.
What do you think, Marshall? Let's talk about this from the right case, because one thing that you focused on last time, you're like, in terms of Bernie, but in terms of this also depends on how the right prosecutes its case. I do not think it's going to be effective in order to turn out the same amount of voters that they were able to turn out and then, you know, keep the same people at home that did stay at home in 2016 if they run the Venezuela socialism sucks. I do also think that is the most likely course of the right to take. What do you think is the effective case against Bernie in those states in particular?
Yeah, so I think there's two different cases that you can make for Trump. You can obviously do the one, and people like Nikki Haley are already starting to say this. It's this very much sort of Ben Shapiro-esque.
The debt.
You want to live in gulags, like the national debt, Venezuela. But the more effective case, and maybe that's going to work in places like Florida. We were just talking about that. But I think if you're looking at the sort of voters voters who Bernie is going to be able to turn out. The more effective case is going to be Bernie is captured by the left. You may, but it's like immigration, which is what you talk. It's immigration, it's culture war issues. It's basically saying to people, look, at the end of the day, the economy is actually working pretty well for you. Donald Trump is going to continue to prosecute the case that he made in 2016. I think the mistake that he could make, and I think this has been the greatest mistake of his presidency, has been his transition from an anti-establishment insurgent candidate to sort of a standard Republican, a Republican who prioritized tax cuts, a Republican who prioritized sort of healthcare reforms that people didn't agree with. Yeah. I think that version of Trump is the one who's most vulnerable to Bernie. And the question is, who is his campaign?
And Bernie's prosecuting that case, I can tell you that.
Well, and that is the thing that I think with Bernie is that he's better positioned to prosecute that case. First of all, he understands that case, which none of the other Democrats really seem to understand that that's his real vulnerability, that he gave away the store to the rich on this tax cut, that he promised to be this working class champion and has governed just like the Chamber of Commerce, that his budget contemplates cuts to entitlements to Social Security, the very thing he promised that he wouldn't do. And Bernie is uniquely positioned to be able to make that argument, first of all, because his own record is clean on it. Right, he's been very consistent on those principles, and also because it's just his fundamental understanding of the populist nature of the electorate that he would even that is the central case that he is making against Trump, where the other candidates focus more on like the tone, the tenor, the norms and guardrails, et cetera. The things that people, you may want them to care about it, but they just don't.
But here's my problem with Sanders. I actually agree with the premise of Sanders that we have a big problem with income inequality. There's a big problem with fairness in our system. I agree with that. But Sanders and a lot of his supporters, if you don't agree with everything they say, then somehow you are declared not a Democrat or not progressive enough or not fighting for the working class.
Don't you think that case is hard to make when he just won 50% of the vote in Nevada across demographic groups? Like, are they all toxic Bernie bros? Have they all been turned off by the movement? No, they haven't.
He did really well with Latinos and overperformed in Nevada. I think that's great. But my nervousness is, if he can turn off someone like me by saying that I'm not progressive enough or I'm not down enough with the cause, then he's going to turn off a lot of other Democrats who are even more kind of centrist.
See, I actually hard disagree because I think you're going to vote for whoever the Democratic nominee is. I'm not worried. You're not in question.
Absolutely. But I'm not everybody.
The problem is winning over people who frankly have no use for the Democratic Party, who have contempt for the Democratic Party. And I've always thought that actually Bernie Sanders' greatest strength, why he does so well with independents, in spite of some views that are out of line, out of step with independents, is because he goes against the Democratic Party. It's because he's not a Democrat that actually in a general election is his greatest strength.
That's why Trump won.
And the funny thing about this is I think it was Hillary Clinton who had the attack of everyone in the Senate hates him. That's actually Bernie's strongest sort of thing. Like, Bernie is running a campaign against an America where people hate literally every single institution that's in power. It's the media, it's corporations, it's DC. And Bernie, I think the thing that's going to be different here is Bernie's going to pivot his case in the general election.
I hope
he's not going to make this about sort of Twitter debates about Medicare for all. What he's going to basically be saying is he's going to run against Washington. He's going to say and signal that he recognizes the case that Donald Trump made in 2016, but he failed to prosecute it. Basically, a better version of the Mike can get it done ads that we sort of see.
Michael, I don't know if you saw, there was a very interesting moment to me in the 60 Minutes interview with Anderson Cooper, where Anderson was like asking him about, you call yourself a revolutionary, you say you want to take out the Democratic Party, and Bernie was like, let's calm down with that rhetoric, essentially. And it seemed to me like that general election pivot to, look, everybody's welcome here. Let's not go overboard with calling these ideas insane and radical when, in fact, most of the American people, or at least certainly a large proportion of the Democratic electorate, supports them. It was an interesting note to tell to me about the way he's thinking about going forward.
Yeah, and his tweet the other day where he made the comment about the Democratic establishment, you can't stop us.
And the Republican establishment.
True, but at some point he needs the Democratic establishment to come out to vote for him. So he's got to be able to have, the Democratic Party does not have the same kind of support, the kind of fever pitch support that Republicans do.
I actually wish, by the way, that we had any support. But the real thing is, Marshall, I think they're going to do it regardless. That's what they did with Trump. Is Trump made them bow before him, and then they ended up working for him. That's ultimately, look, if the Dems want to believe their own record, their own rhetoric, this is existential and all that stuff, they're all gonna vote for him. They're all gonna support him in the general.
I hope you're right.
But they are. I mean, what else are they gonna do?
This would be
Even
different.
Jennifer Rubin said she's going to vote for Bernie Sanders.
But in
we didn't get to
2016,
that yet.
in 2016, people said that Trump was an existential threat, and we had to elect Hillary Clinton. And Bernie Sanders supporters, some of them stayed home. I mean, there was a
because they didn't believe it.
There's a
Yeah.
higher proportion of Bernie Sanders supporters that backed Hillary Clinton ultimately than Hillary supporters who backed Barack Obama ultimately. So let's be clear about the historical record.
What were the Hillary people who wouldn't vote?
Party unity, my ass.
I forget.
No,
Pumas.
Pumas.
Yeah, I forgot about
2008
that. 2008 things.
First 2020 Puma reference in the book.
Here we go.
All right, guys, stick with us. We're going to have more for you right after this.